The clock looks to be 10:30. Good morning and welcome to the May meeting of the Federal Communications Commission. Madam Secretary, before we turn to you and ask you to give us today's meeting plan, we should announce and should note that today is the 81st anniversary of your grandfather, Jesse Owens, setting 4 world records in 45 minutes at the Big Ten championship meet.
Right, at that place up north.
Don't mention it. Exactly. Well done. Notice how in my recounting of this, I refused to name the venue. But yes, it was at that place up north. That's a big day in history. That's, 4 world records, 45 minutes. It's
45
hard.
minutes.
It's hard to conceptualize.
Yes.
But from that high, please take us to the agenda today.
Thank you. Thank you for recognizing a special day. Good morning to you and good morning, commissioners. For today's meeting, you will hear 3 items for your consideration. First, you will consider a notice of proposed rulemaking that seeks comment on proposals to eliminate the requirement that commercial broadcast stations retain copies of letters and emails from the public in their public inspection file, and the requirement that cable operators reveal the location of the cable system's principal head end. Second, you will consider a report and order, further notice of proposed rulemaking, and order on reconsideration to update Part 4 Communications Network outage reporting requirements. Third, you will consider a report and order and further notice of proposed rulemaking regarding a competitive bidding process for high-cost universal service support from Phase 2 of the Connect America Fund. Please note the consent agenda as listed in the Commission's May 2016 Sunshine Notice has been deleted from today's agenda, and items 1, 5, and 6 on the consent agenda were adopted by the Commission. This is your agenda for today. The first item, entitled Revisions to Public Inspection File Requirements, Broadcaster Correspondence File and Cable Principal Head-End Location, will be presented by the Media Bureau, and Bill Lake, Chief of the Bureau, will give the introduction.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Mr. Lake.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners.
Good morning.
Today, the Media Bureau presents a notice of proposed rulemaking that proposes to eliminate 2 public inspection file requirements. First, the requirement that commercial broadcast stations retain copies of correspondence from the public in their public files. And second, the requirement that cable operators maintain for public inspection the designation and location of the operator's principal head end. We believe that these changes would reduce regulatory burdens on commercial broadcasters and cable operators without adversely affecting the public interest. They also would further the Commission's recent progress in modernizing its public inspection files. Joining me at the table are Holly Sauer and Martha Heller of the Media Bureau. Martha will present the item.
Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, we are pleased to present this notice of proposed rulemaking that continues the Commission's efforts to update its public inspection file requirements. The correspondence file requirement, adopted in 1973, requires commercial broadcasters to retain and make available to the public the letters and emails they receive regarding operation of the station. The original goal of the requirement was to ensure that commercial broadcasters comply with their public interest obligation to air programming that is responsive to the needs and interests of their community of license. The NPRM tentatively concludes that this requirement is not necessary to achieve this purpose, however, as the Commission generally reviews licensee performance at renewal time and considers any comments and petitions filed by interested parties in conjunction with renewal applications. In addition, while the Commission has recently moved to an online public inspection file, the correspondence file cannot be made available online for privacy reasons. Eliminating this requirement would therefore permit commercial TV and radio broadcasters to cease maintaining a local public file and instead post their entire public inspection file online. Eliminating the rule also would create greater regulatory parity, as other entities subject to our online public file rules do not have a correspondence file requirement and therefore have more flexibility to transition entirely to online files. With respect to the cable head-end public file requirement, cable operators currently are required to include in their public files the designation and location of the cable system's principal head-end. The Commission adopted this requirement in 1993 as part of an order implementing the must-carry and retransmission consent provisions of the 1992 Cable Act. In its recent order expanding the online public inspection file, the Commission noted that some cable operators are concerned that making information about the location of the principal head-end available online poses a potential security risk. The Commission concluded it would not require cable operators to include this information in the online file and instead gave operators the option to continue to retain this information in their local public file. As noted in the NPRM, we are unaware of any reason the general public would need to know the location of a cable system's principal head-end, and therefore we propose to eliminate this public inspection file requirement. We recognize, however, that the designation and location of the principal head-end must be made available to certain entities, including the FCC and local TV stations. The NPRM seeks comment on how principal head-end information should be collected by the FCC and made available to entities that need it. In addition, the NPRM notes that eliminating this public inspection file requirement would permit those cable operators concerned about posting their head-end information online to transition to a fully online public file. The Media Bureau recommends that the Commission adopt this notice of proposed rulemaking and requests editorial privileges. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Heller. Commissioner Clyburn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In 1973, a gallon of gas was just under 40 cents. The Oakland Athletics won the World Series, and Bonanza, which in the early years starred one of my favorite small-screen personalities, Pernell Roberts, would end its 14-season run with 431 episodes. And this is off script, but Mr. Chairman, I must say, in looking to my right, that I had a family of socks just like the Commissioner Pye in 1973. Also in 1973, if you could see, you would know that's pretty funny. In 1973 also marked the year the Commission first required commercial radio and television broadcasters to retain letters received from the public in a public inspection file. Yes, the world looked very different then. And while not always a justification for changing Commission rules, a look at the facts suggests that it is time for us to reassess whether the requirement that commercial broadcast stations retain copies of letters and emails from the public as part of their public inspection files. An individual seeking to provide their local broadcaster with written feedback some 40 years ago basically only had one option: to submit a letter in paper form. Today, we can avail ourselves of several platforms, and a social media post on a broadcaster's page can be far more impactful than a letter or an email sent directly to a television or radio station's office. I remain a firm believer in the power of transparency and disclosure, which is why I have supported recent Commission actions to move the vast majority of the public inspection file online. This makes information more accessible to the general public. At the same time, I am cognizant of the regulatory burdens and the potential privacy concerns associated with posting individual letters and emails online. Today's NPRM seeks to balance these interests and recognizes that members of the public will continue to have multiple means of communicating their comments or concerns, including direct contact with the FCC as part of a station's license renewal application process. Any renewal challenges made by the public will continue to be available in a station's online file as well as in the Commission's licensing databases. Similarly, as the Commission reassesses its requirement to maintain a broadcaster's correspondence file, I agree that it now makes sense to look at eliminating principal head-end information from a cable operator's public inspection file. When was the last time you overheard two friends talking about the location of their cable operator's head-end? If you have an answer to that, keep it to yourself. Unless these individuals work in the communications industries or are incredibly bored, it is unlikely that such a conversation takes place with any regularity. But it also is important to note that for those entities with a legitimate need for head-end location information, the NPRM commits to adopting a means for ensuring that this remains available to them. I would like to thank the Media Bureau for their work on this item, as well as their continued focus on ways to reduce regulatory burdens without diminishing the public's right to access valuable station information.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Rosenworcel.
4 years ago, the Commission's public file policies got their first dose of modernity when the agency made it possible to move these files from dusty old cabinets and television broadcast studios to a new cloud-based online database. 4 months ago, we offered up a second serving of the same when we took steps to permit radio, cable, and satellite providers to also post their public files online. And today, we continue on the same course by starting a rulemaking to cut the remaining elements of our public file requirements that still require paper files. Specifically, we seek comment on eliminating broadcast correspondence files and cable head-end disclosure requirements. The net effect of eliminating both requirements would be allowing commercial broadcasters and cable providers to put their entire public file online. This strikes me as modern and timely, so I look forward to the record that develops and thank the Media Bureau.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Pai.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The late singer and actress Pearl Bailey, who I'm sure Commissioner Clyburn remembers, once famously said, "What the world really needs is more love and less paperwork." The FCC can't do much about the former, but today we do something about the latter. In particular, this notice of proposed rulemaking raises the question of whether the FCC should continue to require commercial broadcast stations to maintain letters and emails from the public in a paper inspection file. In my view, this mandate is an unnecessary regulatory burden. Indeed, the very words hard copy, paper, and inspection file are enough to glaze the eyes of an increasingly digital citizenry. I therefore support the proposal to eliminate this mandate. For there is little, if any, connection between the requirement and its purported goal of ensuring that a station serves its local community. Without the requirement, viewers and listeners would still be able to tell any broadcaster and the FCC what they think of a station's performance. Moreover, getting rid of this requirement would allow commercial broadcasters to exclusively use an online public file rather than maintaining both physical and digital files. I also support the requirement to get rid of the rule that cable operators disclose head-end location information, in their public inspection files. When the Commission was considering cable operators' online file obligations, I appreciated my colleagues' willingness to refrain from ordering cable operators to post the location of their system's principal head-ends on the Internet. Widely disseminating that information, in my view, would have heightened security threats without any corresponding benefit to the public. But cable operators are still required to place head-end location information in a paper inspection file. This mandate is entirely unnecessary. What was true for digital is true for analog. There is no legitimate need for the public to know the location of a cable system's principal head-end. Indeed, making the location of such critical infrastructure available to the general public could increase the security risks facing those facilities. And, once again, repealing this rule would allow cable operators to transition fully to an online public file and stop storing all of that paper. Now, too often of late, the FCC has imposed unnecessary regulatory burdens that don't benefit consumers. But here, we are showing more love toward the public interest by proposing to get rid of paperwork. That's why I support this notice and a prompt resolution to this proceeding. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner O'Reilly, you are the godfather of this initiative. You have suggested and spearheaded it, and we thank you for that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will actually submit my statement for the record. I want to thank the staff for their hard work and thank the chairman for his openness in adding this to this meeting. I think it's an important step forward. I look forward to completing the NPRM. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Commissioner. I, too, have a statement for the record. Thank you very much to the Bureau for all of your efforts. So we'll proceed to a vote on the item. All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed? The ayes have it. The item is adopted. The request for editorial privileges is granted with the exception or objection noted. Thank you very much. Madam Secretary.
Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, the next item on your agenda will be presented by the Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau. It is entitled Amendments to Part 4 of the Commission's Rules Concerning Disruptions to Communications, New Part 4 of the Commission's Rules.
Admiral, good morning.
Today I'm pleased to present an item that will promote public safety by ensuring the Commission has accurate, usable data on the health of the nation's communications networks, including both legacy and IP-based platforms. For more than a decade, communication providers have informed the FCC of major disruptions to their networks through our network outage reporting system. That data enables staff to identify outage trends, support service restoration efforts, and help coordinate with public safety officials during times of crisis. Our analysis of the data facilitates industry development of best practices and technology solutions. In short, these reports provide the FCC with visibility into the status of communication networks industry-wide, giving a true picture of network reliability. However, technology has changed dramatically since we first established network outage reporting requirements. American citizens, businesses, public safety personnel, and critical infrastructure industries increasingly rely on broadband connections for their communication needs. Many critical services, like 911, once provisioned locally, now rely on connectivity to cloud-based and other capabilities, often located many states away. While broadband services continue to fuel wonderful new advances, they also introduce unique vulnerabilities. It is critical that our network outage reporting program keeps pace with technological change. To that end, today's item refines our network outage reporting requirements and proposes common sense updates. Through the rules we propose today, we believe that the Commission can extend its long-standing success with legacy outage reporting to today's broadband communications environment and facilitate the creation of more reliable, resilient, and secure communications infrastructure. Joining me at the table today are Lisa Folks, my Deputy Bureau Chief, Brenda Villanueva, an honors attorney in the Bureau, and Stephen McKinnon, a communications engineer in our Bureau. We wish to thank the many bureaus and offices that have helped with this item. Ms. Villanueva, pregnant with her first child, her husband in the audience today, will present her first item before the Commission today. Brenda, over to you.
Thank you, Admiral Simpson. Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. I am pleased to present a report and order on reconsideration, and a further notice of proposed rulemaking to improve the Commission's network outage reporting rules and update them to address technological advancements in communication networks, including the nation's transition to IP-based and newer technologies. First, the report and order makes targeted refinements to these rules to improve the usefulness of the data for legacy networks. For major transport facilities, the report and order updates the reporting metric and threshold from a copper to a fiber OC3-based standard and ensures that providers report on events that negatively impact network resiliency, often referred to as simplex events. Next, the report and order adopts a standardized method for wireless providers to calculate the number of potential users affected during a wireless service outage and introduces a flexible methodology for calculating user impact for wireless service outages that affect a 911 call centers. The report and order also clarifies the standard for determining what constitutes a reportable loss of communications to 911 call centers and closes a gap that resulted in unreported outages impacting 911 call centers. Second, the order on reconsideration streamlines our rules for reporting outages affecting special offices and facilities. Third, in the further notice, we initiate a discussion and propose reporting requirements to keep pace with technological changes in emergency and non-emergency communications. Specifically, the further notice proposes both service outages and debilitating service degradation incidents in broadband networks be reported. The further notice also proposes changes to align reporting rules for interconnected VoIP providers with those for legacy networks in order to obtain more useful data. Finally, the further notice proposes to require wireless providers to report on certain call failures in the radio access network and the local access network, and to amend the reporting requirements to better reflect wireless outages in rural areas. Taken together, these rules and proposals will keep the Commission abreast of challenges to and promote the reliability of the networks that American citizens, businesses, public safety, and critical infrastructures industries rely on for their communication needs. The Bureau recommends adoption of the item and requests editorial privileges. Thank you.
Great job. Where's Mr. Villanueva?
He's a gentleman with the camera.
The guy with the big smile on his face, huh? You should be proud. Thank you for sharing Brenda with us. Okay? Mr. Clyburn.
Congratulations again to the family. Great job.
Thank you.
Last week, as part of my Connecting Communities tour, I had the privilege of visiting the Charleston County Consolidated 911 Center in North Charleston, South Carolina. I learned about their current implementation of Text to 911. Charleston County has the distinction of being among the approximately 8% of PSAPs nationwide with this capability, as well as their strategic plans for implementing next generation 911 service. Like many other PSAPs in this country, Charleston County is considering implementing an Emergency Services IP Network, or EZNet, as a foundation for the provisioning of next generation 911 service to its community. These broadband-enabled networks support the transmission of very large data files, such as pictures and videos, the sharing of data between PSAPs, the transfer of operations to other 911 centers, and many other notable benefits. Broadband networks and services are the future of next generation 911 and accordingly are critical to the nation's emergency preparedness and crises management. But our nation's reliance on broadband networks extends far beyond emergency services, with broadband being an essential tool for anyone who wants to fully engage in our connected society. Broadband is, as I often say, a connector to opportunities. And as the nation's demand for broadband services increases and providers continue to modify and improve their networks, it is imperative that the Commission's network outage reporting rules keep pace. The report and order and final notice aim to do just that. It is important to keep in mind that the fundamental purpose of these rules is to collect and analyze data that would affect the nation's security, public health, and economic well-being, information that the Commission has no means of gathering on a consistent and reliable basis from any other source. The gathered by these reports helps providers, industry working groups, and the Commission staff to identify and address systematic vulnerabilities in order to improve network reliability and resiliency and ideally prevent future outages. I applaud the providers' commitment to assist the Commission in the fulfillment of this fundamental statutory mandate to promote the safety of life and property by protecting the nation's communications networks. I also recognize that executing new reporting requirements takes time, planning, and resources, which is why I ask for sensible timelines for the implementation of the reporting obligations in the report and order, and clarity on acceptable methodologies for allocating capacity when an outage only affects some PSAPs served by a mobile switching center. Many thanks, of course, are due to the staff of Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau for their hard work and continued dedication to ensuring that the nation's communications infrastructure is reliable, is resilient, and, of course, secure. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Rosenworcel.
2 weeks ago, households and businesses across New York, Connecticut, Massachusetts, and Rhode Island were jolted into the pre-digital past when, without any warning, they lost access to internet and phone service. The culprit, an accidental fiber cut, a mistake by a third-party contractor. It was hours before the situation was fixed, but in the interim, it was hard to connect with family and friends. Binge watching was out. Routine activities that require access to the internet were impossible, and businesses lost untold access to customers. But worse, public safety was affected, as an unknown number of customers were simply unable to dial 911. And what happened in the Northeast earlier this month is hardly unique. Last year, vandals in California destroyed fiber facilities, disrupting internet access in San Francisco and Sacramento. Across the country in Florida, 14,000 broadband customers in Miami lost internet service for hours, the result of a construction error. And in Arizona, when an underground bundle of fiber optics were maliciously cut in Flagstaff, cash machines went down, stores couldn't process credit cards, and emergency dispatch services were lost. No matter where you live, when communication service shuts off, modern life grinds to a halt. This is not just inconvenient. It's a dangerous new vulnerability. It's a problem. But we cannot manage problems that we do not measure. That is why our action here is so important. We refine our existing rules for outage reporting in order to ensure that the data we receive is both timely and accurate. And then we seek comment on outage reporting for broadband service because we have to understand communications vulnerabilities in order to address them. So this public safety effort has my full and unequivocal support, as does Brenda, who before she sat at this table before us and read so well, and before she became an honors attorney at the FCC, was an intern in my office.
Hear, hear. Bragging rights.
Exactly. Thank you for your contributions to this item, the agency, and during your time in my office.
Thank you, Commissioner. And you know, the way in which you put this in such real-world terms with examples helps drive home, you know, what has the potential to be such a dry topic, but makes it very real. Thank you, Commissioner Pai.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks, of course, to Brenda for your public service to the agency, made explicit this morning, and to the Villanueva family for the impending addition. Wish you all the best in the time to come, and hopefully a few hours of sleep as well. I would just write off the sleep right now. So, a year ago, the Commission unanimously adopted a notice of proposed rulemaking that sought to modernize and streamline our outage reporting rules. We sought comment on targeted reforms that would eliminate unnecessary reporting obligations while requiring companies, including broadband providers, to submit useful information about actual outages that impact consumers. I supported the notice because updating these rules would advance the Commission's core public safety obligations and would focus the private sector's attention on getting consumers back online rather than filing unnecessary paperwork. But somewhere between the notice's good intentions and the document before us, This proceeding went way off track. Rather than focusing on outages that actually impact consumers, the Commission mandates that companies file reports even when their networks are fully functioning and no consumer is affected. Rather than requesting targeted outage information that would make it easier for the FCC to identify trends and threats, it requires a flood of new reports that will only make this task more difficult. Rather than promoting public safety and lowering costs for consumers, the item simply asserts that we're improving public safety, and in fact, raises costs. Examples abound. Take what the order refers to as a simplex event. For those lucky enough not to be steeped in the arcane world of wireline, a simplex event occurs when a circuit loses one of its many redundant pathways. Given the circuit's design, a simplex event has no impact on the consumer. The traffic carried by that circuit is automatically rerouted. And, as the redacted record evidence shows, a simplex event isn't a signal of things to come. It doesn't mean that additional or cascading network failures will come that would impact a consumer. Moreover, in the 911 context, the FCC doesn't require any outage reporting at all when rerouting is available. But rather than harmonize our rules and eliminate this unnecessary simplex reporting obligation, the FCC doubles down on it. It expands the number of simplex events that trigger reporting obligations, a step that even the order concedes will result in hundreds upon hundreds of new reports each year. This is paperwork without a purpose. The further notice of proposed rulemaking dives down similar rabbit holes. On the wireless side, the Commission does not limit its proposal to cell towers that are down. Instead, it tentatively concludes that providers must file outage reports when their towers are fully functional and operating at capacity. It doesn't matter if there are no call failures. It does not matter if excess demand never materializes. And it certainly does not matter if the report diverts resources that could be used to identify and repair actual outages. The Commission proposes that providers must nonetheless report that these towers are out. Now, tellingly, the Commission places the word out in quotation marks throughout this section, which simply highlights its refusal to focus on actual outages. The further notice's approach to broadband is another prime example. Instead of focusing on actual outages, it concludes that broadband providers should track and report on numerous metrics selected by the FCC, like packet loss, latency, and throughput, among other potential metrics. Now, these are metrics that may have nothing to do with an outage or consumers' ability to use their broadband services. The further notice even suggests that broadband providers will be responsible for providing reports about facilities that they don't own, that they don't operate, that they don't lease, or that they don't use. This is a marked departure and a bizarre distraction from the goals of our outage reporting system. Indeed, in 2012, under then-Chairman Janikowski, the Commission unanimously rejected going down this road. It declined to require reports on packet loss, latency, and other metrics that don't necessarily affect consumers. Instead, it concluded unanimously that the agency would focus on outages that result in a complete loss of service or connectivity. The Commission found unanimously that doing so would be simpler, more consistent with our outage reporting regime, and would balance the agency's need for outage reports with the burdens that our rules impose on providers and, in turn, consumers. I ask my colleagues to recommit to this bipartisan approach, an approach calibrated to the consumer experience and one far more likely to yield useful information to the Commission and to the public. Unfortunately, the majority refused to support that request. Another major deficiency in this document is its cost-benefit analysis, or rather, the lack thereof. A meaningful discussion of the costs and benefits is nowhere to be found in today's decision. Indeed, the FCC focuses almost exclusively on the nation's largest broadband providers, AT&T, Comcast, and Verizon, for instance, and suggests that those corporations are large enough to bear the costs imposed by our rules, however steep they might be. That might be true, and perhaps this reflects the market structure that the majority would like to see, fewer providers and far more regulation. But there is virtually no consideration given to the thousands of small and mid-sized providers who are critical to competition in these markets. Small cable operators, cellular companies, fixed wireless competitors, and others lack the army of lawyers and regulatory compliance departments that their larger competitors employ. Many of them have told the FCC that this top-heavy approach to outage reporting will siphon resources away from broadband deployment, slow genuine outage repair, and provide no benefit to consumers. And there is reason to believe that the regulatory costs will be quite high. At least one provider submitted a detailed quantitative analysis of the costs associated with this reporting regime. Remember, the FCC requires 3 separate reports for every outage or event. And the analysis shows that it takes about a dozen hours to prepare and file just one of those reports. And that's nearly 6 times the number of hours the FCC includes in its cost estimate. So how does the agency respond to this data? How does it modify its cost-benefit analysis? It doesn't. It simply asserts, quote, "We are not convinced that 12 hours are necessary." Well, why is that exactly? What is the basis for this assertion? The agency offers literally no insight. In the end, of course, none of this matters. For this proceeding is not about actual outages that impact actual consumers, nor is it about gathering targeted and useful information. It is about regulation for its own sake. And that's a shame, because there are concrete steps that we can and should be taking in this proceeding and in others, like the contraband cell phone docket, to promote public safety in a way that would actually benefit the public interest. But here, because we do not focus on actual outages that impact consumers, I dissent from the bulk of today's decision. I do concur, however, with 2 parts of the order. First, I agree that we should eliminate the obsolete DS3-based reporting metric. And second, the order now provides a more reasonable transition period for providers to comply with the new reporting requirements, a change that both Commissioner O'Reilly and I urged our colleagues to make. I only wish that we could have found more common ground. For common ground, there was to be found.
Commissioner O'Reilly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have expressed concerns in the past about the Commission's reporting requirements because such reports tend to be gateways to even more costly regulations, even if industry ultimately agrees to the requirements. And while I remain skeptical of our Part 4 information collections, I'm able to concur to today's order portion because it does help clarify current rules and provides some relief to entities that fall under the reporting regime. Further edits that I propose along with Commissioner Pai and Clyburn to ensure that industry has a reasonable time to implement the revised rules were accepted. And the Chairman's office agreed to require that simplex outages would have to be reported within 4 days as opposed to 3, which will reduce costs for all entities, but especially small businesses. Additionally, edits were made at my request to those sections of the order and notice regarding the synchronization of the Part 4 reporting structure across all services. Regrettably, this is about the only positive thing I can say about the substance of the further notice, which I strongly oppose. Yet again, the Commission predictably continues its power grab over the Internet by extending the outage reportings to so-called broadband Internet access services. From a statutory authority perspective, this item represents quite an epic work of fiction. Over 8 pages, the Commission uses the kitchen sink approach, invoking the CVAA, Title II, including Section 254, implementing the Universal Service Fund, Section 706, Title III, and others to justify the proposal. Even Section 4.0 is bandied about as a rationale for this travesty. Regardless of my well-known disagreement regarding our statutory authority over the Internet, some of the ideas teed up in this notice are just preposterous. For instance, biased providers may have to act as a central reporting point for outages occurring in the Internet services such as IP transport that are outside their control. It even goes so far to make the outrageous suggestion that biased providers should enter into agreements that would enable them to acquire outage information that originate with other providers who may, in some cases, be their competitor. Generally, it is unclear what the Commission would do with all this collected information about broadband networks. It seems likely that the Commission's plans even more regulation on the resiliency and reliability of the Internet, as that language of the notice is quite telling. In the section regarding performance degradation and general useful availability and connectivity, which is code for not really an outage, the Commission asks, should we consider a metric measuring the average relative bandwidth where providers should compare active bandwidth against the provider's bandwidth as advertised or offered? This suggests the requirement would be used to further bolster the net neutrality transparency rule and/or as a means to an Enforcement Bureau game of gotcha. The notice also inquires into whether reports should include information about unintended changes to software or firmware or unintended modifications to databases. Once again, the Commission is trying to edge its way into the realm of cybersecurity. The Commission should not attempt to use reporting as a backdoor method to insert itself into the cyber debate. Another utterly ridiculous idea is that the providers would have to file an outage report in the case of congestion in either a wireless or wireline network. Yes, congestion, which occurs in a fully functional communications network, will be treated as an actual outage. A similar theme is in the section discussing VoIP outage reporting. This is an ultimate fishing expedition unglued from rationality or necessity. Lastly, the cost-benefit analysis contained in this item is dreadful. Not only is the quantitative analysis and comparison of the costs and benefits for the modified and proposed reporting requirements insufficient, but the item summarily dismisses one industry participant's assessment that it takes 11 to 12 hours to prepare and file an outage report. Frankly, I'm more likely to believe the detailed analysis of those who actually file these reports as opposed to the Commission's analysis that it only takes 2 hours. For these reasons, and noting that the issues I raised regarding the notice are illustrative of the overall flawed approach, I must dissent in part. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner, and we appreciate the opportunity to work with you on the order, and I'm sure we'll have a similar opportunity as we move forward on the notice. There's an old maxim in management that if you can measure it, you can manage it. And you just as Commissioner Rosenworcel, citing her MBA, recently observed, if you can measure it, you can manage it. That's the practice that's in place today in our networks. What this order does is to continue a practice that's been in place for over a decade with regard to copper-based analog networks and apply it to IP-based networks. So this order, far from imposing new requirements, says the requirements that you have in place, the practices that you have in place as responsible managers, we, as responsible managers, would like to know what the results from those reveal insofar as the operation of networks, which are increasingly essential to everything we do today, again, as Commissioner Rosenworcel pointed out in her comments. She's now pointing out to me, we cannot manage problems that we do not. Well, that's different. That's the same point. But the old maxim, I could quote you all the old maxims. It's much more satisfying. I would agree with that. Finishing my reading of Commissioner Rosenworcel's, what she talked about, what happened in the Northeast earlier this month, what happened in California, disrupting internet access in San Francisco and Sacramento, across the country in Florida, and a construction error that led to 14,000 broadband customers in Miami losing. That's information we ought to know about. That's information that goes to the heart of Section 1, the first page of the Act, that says we have a responsibility for national security and public safety, such as the information that is transmitted, or in those instances that Commissioner Rosenworcel cited and that the record is replete with, were not transmitted, and that's why we need to know this. So, all in favor? I can repeat some more old management adages if you'd like, but all those in favor of this, please say aye. 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 Opposed? The ayes have it. The request for editorial privileges is granted with the objection noted. Madam Secretary.
Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, the last item on your agenda today will be presented by the Wireline Competition Bureau. It is entitled Connect America Fund, ETC Annual Reports and Certifications and Rural Broadband Experiments. And Matt Del Nero, Chief of the Bureau, will give the introduction.
Good morning.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. The Wireline Bureau is pleased to present to you a report and order and further notice of proposed rulemaking, taking the next steps in advancing Phase 2 of the Connect America Fund. As conceived by the Commission in its USF-ICC transformation order, Phase 2 consists of two parts. The first part took place last summer when price cap carriers accepted over $1.5 billion in annual model-based support to expand and support broadband in rural areas. The item we present to you today brings us closer to achieving the second critical step, that is, a competitive bidding process to award funding in areas where the price cap carriers decline support. In particular, the item before you would adopt rules to implement that competitive process, and it begins the process of seeking comment on certain key auction procedures. The item is grounded in the Commission's overarching goal of providing households in high-cost areas with access to high-quality broadband services while making the most efficient use of finite universal service funds. Staff of the Wireline Competition Bureau, led by Carol Maddie, wrote the item, working closely with our colleagues in the Wireless Telecommunications Bureau, who have generously shared with us their vast expertise on auction design and implementation. I also would like to acknowledge the contributions of the Office of Managing Director, Engineering and Technology, Strategic Planning and Policy Analysis, General Counsel, and the International and Enforcement Bureaus. In addition to those at the table with me, I would like to acknowledge the dedicated high-cost team in the Wireline Bureau for their hard work in moving this item forward, including Heidi Lankow, Katie King, Talmadge Cox, and Steve Rosenberg. With me at the table are Carol Maddie, Deputy Bureau Chief and deserving recipient of this year's FCBA Excellence in Government Service Award, if I can make a plug. Ryan Palmer, Chief of the Telecommunications Access Policy Division, and Alex Menard, Deputy Chief of the Division. Alex will now present the item.
Thank you, Matt. Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. The item we present to you today builds on decisions previously made by the Commission and adopts rules to implement a competitive bidding process for Phase 2 of the Connect America Fund. The report and order, if adopted, would further the Commission's efforts to modernize the universal service regime to support future-proof networks capable of providing voice and broadband in rural and high-cost areas. Of note, the report and order adopts public interest obligations for recipients of support awarded through the Phase 2 competitive bidding process, including establishing technology-neutral requirements for bidders that will be known in advance of the auction and that will continue for the duration of the 10-year term of support. The report and order recognizes that competitive bidding is likely to be more efficient if potential bidders are aware of their performance standards before bids are made. Specifically, the order establishes 4 technology-neutral service standards with bidder flexibility to designate either low or high latency for each service. First, a minimum performance tier providing broadband speeds of at least 10 megabits per second downstream and 1 megabit per second upstream, and offering at least 150 gigabytes of monthly usage. Second, a baseline performance tier providing at least 25 megabits per second down and 3 megabits per second up, and offering a minimum usage allowance that is the higher of 150 gigabytes per month or the average usage of a majority of fixed broadband customers nationwide, to be announced annually. Third, an above baseline performance tier providing at least 100 megabits per second down and 20 megabits per second up, and offering an unlimited monthly usage allowance. And fourth, a gigabit performance tier providing at least 1 gigabit per second down and 500 megabits per second up, and offering an unlimited monthly usage allowance. Bidders committing to offer service in these tiers will compete head-to-head with weights for the different tiers to be adopted after further comment. The report and order establishes deployment milestones for auction winners, establishes a budget for the Phase 2 auction of $215 million in annual support, finalizes decisions regarding areas that will be eligible for the Phase 2 auction, and provides general guidance on auction design. Consistent with prior auctions, the report and order adopts a two-step application process: a pre-auction short-form application, during which a potential bidder will need to establish baseline financial and technical capabilities in order to be eligible to bid, and a post-auction long-form review process, through which winning bidders will be required to provide additional information regarding their qualifications. The report and order also adopts reporting requirements that will enable the Commission to monitor the progress of support recipients in meeting their interim deployment obligations. Finally, the report and order adopts rules to establish the framework for the Remote Areas Fund, which will award support through a competitive bidding process to occur expeditiously after conclusion of the Phase 2 auction. Specific details of the Phase 2 auction, including the mechanics of bidding, will be determined at a future date after further opportunity for comment. The attached further notice begins this process by seeking comment on three discrete issues relating to the process for determining winning bidders. First, how to weigh bids committing to different performance levels. Second, measures to ensure an appropriate level of Phase 2 support for all states. And third, measures to advance the Commission's policy objective of extending broadband to unserved tribal lands. The further notice also seeks comment on issues relating to interim deployment milestones for non-terrestrial providers or providers that have already deployed the infrastructure they intend to use to fulfill their Phase 2 obligations. The Bureau recommends adoption of this item and requests editorial privileges. Thank you.
Thank you. This has been a long and exhaustive process, and kudos to all of you. Commissioner Clyburn.
When will my community have broadband? For the nearly 7 years I have served as an FCC commissioner, this refrain is one I too often hear as I travel beyond the Beltway. For consumers stuck in the digital darkness, every day is another full of denied opportunities. And while I have been proud to serve and support the FCC's laudable actions taken since the National Broadband Plan was released, the fact remains that change has yet to come for tens of millions of consumers who still lack access. Today, it pleases me to say, we're taking another step to turn shades of digital darkness and despair into beacons of light and connected opportunities. According to the Center for Public Integrity, families in our nation's higher poverty areas are nearly 5 times more likely to not have access to broadband speeds of 25.3 than those residing in the most affluent of households. These are areas of persistent poverty, communities that would actually benefit the most from connectivity, and they are populated by those who are cut off from job opportunities and remain at a market disadvantage when it comes to education, healthcare, government service, and civic participation. I have met with consumers so desperate for connectivity that they literally beg for broadband to be deployed in their communities because they know all too well that they are stuck on the wrong side of the digital divide. They long for a fair chance to improve their communities and their lives with access to broadband, something all of us here, I venture to say, take for granted. It is clear that connecting these areas will not happen overnight. But what our experiences show is that closing these disparities will require both public-private partnerships and public-public partnerships with our federal, state, and local colleagues. So I am pleased that today's item recognizes the important role states play in universal service. In addition, the further notice seeks comment on how to ensure that communities across our nation, particularly in states where incumbent carriers have declined Connect America Fund Phase 2 support, have access to much-needed funding to connect those unserved areas. State and local leaders know their communities best and should be encouraged to partner with the FCC to bridge opportunity divides. The order also encourages smaller entrants to participate in the competitive auction by, for example, making it easier for smaller banks, including community banks, to provide letters of credit, enabling certain parties to provide audited financial statements after being selected as a winning bidder in the auction, and creating a flexible process to enable entities to use a range of technological solutions to provide service in unserved areas. We were able to reach consensus on technology-neutral speeds, capacity and latency tiers for the auction, and those tiers are structured in a way to encourage all providers, fixed or mobile, using licensed or unlicensed spectrum, terrestrial or satellite, to participate. I would have preferred that we also adopt the weights for those tiers now, because weighting will be crucial to ensure that rural areas have access to services reasonably comparable to urban areas as directed by the statute. Even so, I understand the importance of getting the weights for each tier right, and I appreciate the chairman seeking comment on the issue now rather than waiting several months to ask these questions in the auction comment public notice. I also appreciate that the order recognizes the need to spur deployment on tribal lands. For far too long, the FCC has recognized the stark disparities on tribal lands, but has not taken enough action, I don't believe, to close these divides. Indeed, the FCC's 2016 Broadband Progress Report found that more than 68% of Americans living on tribal lands in rural areas lack access to fixed broadband speeds of 25.3. I strongly encourage parties to weigh in on the further notice, which seeks comment on ways to adopt a credit or weight in the auction to encourage bidding on tribal lands. While I am pleased that the action we take today holds the promise to make inroads to connect rural unserved areas, we need to come to terms with the fact that many challenges remain even in our urban areas. If we as a nation are true to our commitment to universal service, we have a duty to take a long, hard look at what is happening, or really what is not happening, in our more densely populated areas. We need to ask and answer the question, why certain pockets of our communities in major metropolitan areas still lack access. As regulators and as public servants, I do not believe we should turn a blind eye to these communities where families can literally see from their windows and stoops the power of connectivity, but remain foreclosed sometimes by less than 2,000 yards of separation from economic opportunities. This is a conversation I seldom hear in these halls, but I believe that needs to change and change today. To the dedicated public servants of the Wireline Competition Bureau and the Office of Strategic Planning and Policy Analysis, I thank you for your unwavering commitment to universal service and for focusing on how to ensure that all Americans have access to the promise that broadband brings.
Thank you, Commissioner, and thank you for keeping us focused on the all. Commissioner Rosenworcel.
In case you haven't noticed, over the last few years, the Commission's universal service policies have been the subject of a few changes. In fact, they've undergone an overhaul. Our programs have been more than just retouched, they've been re-engineered and rebuilt, because we're no longer just out taking a spin on the information superhighway. Today, high-speed communication services are indispensable infrastructure for civic and commercial life. For our high-cost universal service program, this has meant a new name, the Connect America Fund, and a new focus on bringing broadband to rural communities. Today, we advance this cause by putting in place a structure for the upcoming Connect America Fund Phase 2 auction. Between the order and rulemaking, there are a lot of details here, so let me focus on what I think are the most important elements of the auction framework we put in place today. First, our framework ensures that the auction will be open. We need broad participation because there is no one-size-fits-all solution when it comes to getting service in rural communities. So we are open to any provider and technology that meets essential broadband performance and financial criteria. Second, Our framework recognizes that the auction must be fair. It will reward those whose proposals are economically efficient and also advance the statutory goals of universal service, including comparable service at comparable rates. Third, our framework delivers on the need for accountability. The order puts in place oversight mechanisms to make sure that the broadband improvements that result from this auction are both real and measurable. From here, of course, we still have work to do. In particular, we cannot lose sight of our duty to preserve and advance universal service, especially in those states that are the centerpiece of the auction, the states where the price cap carrier turned down its initial offer of support. It would be unacceptable for the residents in these states to lose out again if this auction does not deliver broadband funding that they expect and deserve. Finally, as today's order recognizes, once this auction is in the books, we will need to move quickly to establish the Remote Areas Fund and continue our work to make sure our universal service policies do not leave rural America behind. Thank you to the Wireline Bureau for your efforts.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Pai.
5 years ago, the Commission made a bipartisan promise to the American people to launch the Connect America Fund. We did so to support the deployment of high-speed broadband throughout rural America. Today, we adopt a bipartisan compromise that advances the fund's competitive bidding process. Now, several aspects of this order bode well for the auction. First, we adopt rules designed to induce new entrants like wireless internet service providers, small-town cable operators, and electric utilities to participate. We let financially secure community banks, as well as traditional rural lenders like CoBank and the National Rural Utilities Cooperative Finance Corporation, to underwrite bidders because small businesses often don't have access to the same capital markets as larger ones. We postpone certain filing deadlines until after the auction so that expensive accounting doesn't bar participation and competition. And we treat carriers, smaller carriers, using unlicensed spectrum on par with larger licensees. These were significant changes from the approach originally contemplated. And so I appreciate Commissioner Clyburn and Commissioner Rosenworcel's support for the goal of maximizing participation by all players in the broadband marketplace. Second, we abandoned the multi-step approach to competitive bidding that was proposed in the 7th Recon Order. At the time, I worried that such an approach excludes any mention of evaluating bids based on their efficiency, and includes the option for bids that meet relaxed performance standards, i.e. choosing bids that don't offer 10 megabits per second or even 4 megabits per second down. Instead, we aim here to maximize the broadband bang we get for our universal service buck by establishing a flexible weighting system, one that should incentivize carriers to deploy faster service to rural America at the lowest possible price to the taxpayer. Third, we adopt rules that otherwise track the structure of the competitive bidding process that I asked my colleagues to support in the 7th Recon Order. We proposed to reserve prices based on the Connect America cost model, and that's what we're doing. We proposed the total of all bids accepted nationwide be no greater than the total Connect America Phase 2 budget that remains after the state-level election process, and that's what we're doing. We proposed a multi-round auction so that competitive bidders have the opportunity to reevaluate their bids in light of the actions of others, and that's what we're doing. And while we don't yet adopt package bidding for the auction, the consensus certainly seems to be heading in that direction. There's more to like, but cataloging every change since circulation would be painstaking work. Instead, allow me to thank Commissioner O'Reilly for speaking out about his principles for the auction this past December. His framework, in fact, became the starting point for many of the Commission's deliberations. And additionally, he pushed early and persuaded the floor after circulation of this order for appropriate changes that were ultimately adopted. I don't think that we could have gotten to a bipartisan compromise without his tireless advocacy within the building and without. Now, to be sure, I don't necessarily agree with every aspect of the order. For example, I'd hoped to follow through much more quickly on our 5-year-old promise to adopt these competitive bidding rules. And I would have preferred to give bidders even more flexibility and incentive to offer the very best service possible to rural America. That, of course, is part of the nature of compromise, and I'll accordingly vote to approve in part and concur in part. My thanks to Matt Del Nero and the staff of the Wireline Competition Bureau for their efforts on this item, and particular thanks to my Wireline advisor, Nick Degani. We often joke about the esoteric and jejune nature of wireline regulation, but at the end of the day, it's the rare person who comes into this building being able to say that they are working to deliver digital opportunities to Americans who don't have them. And for that, I thank Nick. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner O'Reilly, the roads seem to keep leading to you on finding the way forward on these kinds of issues.
I've been saying that to you for a long while, Mr. Chairman. There's a lot of things like that. I want to start by thanking the staff. There's represented at the table for all those that are back in the office continuing to work. I want to thank you for all your hard work and getting us to this moment. It's been a long road to get the order and further notice on the Connect America Fund, Phase 2 reverse auction, and remote areas fund forward. The item originally circulated in September would have put a thumb on the scale to fund a handful of fiber projects in low-cost areas, a result that would have run counter to the goals of universal service. I was deeply troubled by this and outlined some sound principles and proposals for this item, as my colleague indicated. Fortunately, as a result of further discussions with staff and colleagues and outside parties, the item has been revised in a positive direction. We are still a long way from home, but at least we are back on course for now. As a result, I'm able to approve in part while dissenting on certain problematic areas of the further notice that could derail this progress. The revised version takes a number of steps to accommodate concerns raised by numerous parties. The minimum standards are now set to enable a wide range of providers to participate in the auction. In addition, the rigid categories have been replaced with more flexible tiers that accommodate a variety of technologies and offerings. For instance, there's now a tier that aligns with the performance requirements that price cap carriers that accepted model-based support must satisfy, which could be met using a mix of fiber, advanced DSL, and wireless technologies. Moreover, instead of a special fiber-only round or waterfall approach, all participants will now bid at the same time, ensuring the maximum possible competition in each round of the multi-round auction. In addition, the order now excludes areas that have at least 10-1 service, targeting funds to areas that need it the most, rather than wasting dollars overbuilding existing providers. All of these changes will have the effect of stretching USF dollars to cover more consumers. That's not to say that I agree with every aspect of the tiers. I would not have included a gigabit tier. Reasonable comparability is about ensuring that rural consumers receive service that does not lag too far behind what a substantial majority of consumers are subscribing to in urban areas. Adding a tier that is significantly above market reality provides a nice soundbite, but is a distraction from the effort to connect the maximum number of people with limited dollars available under our budget. And I've said before, we should buy fewer Lamborghinis and more Chevys. Setting the weights to preserve the balance between performance and cost effectiveness will be critical. The notice has the right objective. It aims to set the weights to achieve our overarching goal of providing households in the relevant high-cost areas with access to high-quality broadband services while making the most efficient use of the finite universal service funds. I worry, however, that the Commission may ultimately adopt weights that disproportionately favor certain technologies and place too high a reward on premium offerings. There's been a lot of discussion about how to name the tiers, but the delta between them is far more important than what gets labeled as a baseline as opposed to the minimum. At the end of the day, if the weighting skews the results such that a few communities receive gigabit service, but many more have no access at all, then the auction will have failed to deliver on the promise of universal service. I hope we will receive a robust record on weighting to ensure good outcomes for both consumers who receive the service as well as ratepayers who contribute fees each month to support the program. I am also troubled by certain proposals in the further notice that would be incompatible with an auction and could further undercut its effectiveness. I recognize the goals of ensuring that consumers in all states and tribal lands are connected. However, the idea that the Commission would install the use of quotas or set-asides to favor certain consumers in certain areas is appalling. Such an approach is not consistent with the Commission's approach to the entirety of universal service. To be clear, the Commission never provided any expectation that particular states would be guaranteed a certain amount of funding in this auction. Universal service is not an entitlement program for specific consumers or states. Instead, the Commission is supposed to design the program in an efficient manner that ensures that dollars flow to areas where they are most needed, consistent with the statute. As federal regulators, we have to take a broad view and focus on consumers nationwide. What matters is we have a plan to serve as many Americans as possible, wherever they are located. States are then free to supplement the federal funding with state programs. Moreover, the idea that certain states were somehow guaranteed the specific funding turned down by price cap carriers is, one, not accurate, and two, misses the point of holding a reverse auction. In fact, the amount of funding that was turned down represents the reserve price, the maximum that we are willing to pay. We hope to pay far less in many places as possible. Indeed, the purpose of a reverse auction is to use competition to incite providers to bid down the reserve so that we can free up dollars to connect additional consumers elsewhere. If the Commission ultimately adopts quotas or set-asides against my wishes, it will have the effect of bypassing lower bids in some states in order to fund costlier bids in other states. A nutty outcome, indeed. Instead, if there are parts of states or tribal lands that are not claimed in this auction, it is because they are more likely than not RAF appropriate places. They may be rural, difficult to access, far from existing providers, or otherwise extremely costly to serve. There may be permitting or other local barriers to investment and deployment. In fact, I've heard this concern raised when I've met with carriers trying to serve certain states, localities, or tribal lands. These places should be included in the Remote Areas Fund rather than receiving special treatment now, which could skew the current auction in inefficient ways. Importantly, the Commission is finally adopting a framework for the Remote Areas Fund, which should give all stakeholders some comfort that winding up in the RAF is not a dead end. For over 2 years, I have pressed the Commission to adopt rules to ensure that consumers in these areas will not be left behind. So I appreciate the steps in this order to solidify the structure of the RAF. I would have preferred to do even more, but I acknowledge staff's view that we may need to retain some flexibility to adjust the parameters to account for lessons learned in the current auction. Moreover, I appreciate staff's commitment to me to continue to work on the RAF in parallel with implementing the current auction so that we may be in a position to commence the RAF auction within a year of the close of the current auction. I want to thank my colleagues and staff for working with me on this item. While the process leading up today was far from ideal, I appreciate the collaborative effort to improve the item, which actually centered on 8th floor pushing and pulling to get the best outcome for unserved consumers. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner. And I would like to identify with your closing remarks there about the efforts that have been undertaken collectively on the 8th floor to try and resolve this, and again recognize your role in that. What we do today is really to go to what you might consider third base in fulfilling our responsibility to support high-cost deployment in rural areas. As has been set up here, first we did the $9 billion for large carriers to subsidize broadband to about 7.3 million people in the price cap proceeding. And second base was $20 billion for smaller rate of return carriers to build broadband. Reaching third with this, we allocate over $2 billion for the next decade of support to areas not reached by the first two efforts, doing this, importantly, on a technologically neutral way, and doing this in a way that sets us up then for the Remote Areas Fund. But I also want to make clear that we're not going to be standing on third base. That while there are final decisions about the auction and the auction itself that will be held, be done subsequently, including the kinds of issues that Senator Schumer and others have raised, that Commissioner O'Reilly has just discussed. We will be dealing with those in the further notice. And that we will make a dash later this year for our fourth goal, Mobility Fund 2. and an order on that to support wireless connectivity in currently unserved areas, as well as addressing an order addressing the uniqueness of tribal lands, as Commissioner Clyburn has pointed out. So with that, we'll call for the vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? The ayes have it. The item is adopted. The request for editorial privileges is granted with the objection noted, and thank you to the Bureau. Any colleagues want to bring anything up? Commissioner Clyburn?
No.
Rose Norris? Hi.
Just a few. I wanted to mention a couple of our colleagues who are departing. First, Bill Klein, who has spent 26 years at the FCC, 42 years in the civil service. I know Bill very well in my previous life at the Commission as a staffer when I was the point person for the very exciting Part 1 and Part 0 reforms, procedural reforms to the way we do business, allowing us to, for example, terminate dormant proceedings, letting or requiring people to file things electronically. But the most favorite reform I had, which I learned about from Bill, was the fact that in every single proceeding, in every bureau, it used to be the practice of the FCC that whenever someone filed a follow-up comment or any kind of paper, somebody at the FCC or people at the FCC would have to make a hard copy of that and send it to everybody else who had ever filed in that proceeding. We had literally people spending time in the bowels of the building doing nothing but making copies and sending out envelopes. And it was thanks to Bill, who was at the Information Technology Center, that arcane requirement has literally just gone the way of paper itself. I really want to thank Bill for his friendship and for his service to the agency for over a quarter century. He's a big loss to the Commission, but I certainly wish him well. Secondly, Greg Klybach, who spent 15 years working at the FCC. We know him most prominently as the division chief in the Disability Rights Office, who appeared before us on things such as CVAA implementation. He was a tireless public servant to ensure that the benefit of technology extends to those with people with disabilities. And I dare say millions of Americans with disabilities very much appreciate what he did for the agency. Turning to people who are arriving, we have two interns who are already here for the summer, a couple of eager beavers. First, Matt Butler. If you wouldn't mind standing, Matt. A wave isn't going to do it, I'm afraid. He just finished his first year at Yale Law School. He hails from Medfield, Massachusetts, and while he may look like a rather vanilla fellow, I've noticed that he's sort of a man at war with himself. He's from Massachusetts, as I said, but he's oddly enough a New York Yankees fan. 2 years ago, he worked on Charlie Baker's successful gubernatorial campaign in the Bay State, and given that he has survived as a Massachusetts Republican and a Boston Yankees fan, I have hope that he's going to fare well in a minority office at the FCC. Before attending law school, Matt studied art history at Princeton, including media regulation during the Italian Renaissance, a very practical topic if there ever was one. He also earned a degree in religious ethics at Yale Divinity School. The former obviously could prove useful during our upcoming review of media ownership policies, and the latter, I suspect, could be helpful in the likely event that we need to call in a higher authority. In all seriousness, know that Matt will be a great addition to our team. He's already contributed the line of the summer, saying to the self-styled hip millennial Nick Degani, "Why would someone in Generation X want to be on Facebook?" Ooh, that knife dug deep. Next, Jessica Cameron. Jessica just finished her second year at UCLA. Her favorite movie of all time is Anchorman, fitting because she is originally from San Diego, which, as you know, was discovered by the Germans in 1904. She also has many leather-bound books, and she proudly boasts that her apartment smells of rich mahogany. Jessica also received her undergraduate degree from UCLA, where she majored in business economics, minored in accounting, and tried to maintain her affinity for carne asada burritos. After graduation, she moved to D.C. and worked as a legislative assistant on the House Ways and Means Committee. Jessica is no stranger to the Commission. Last summer, she clerked with the Wireless Bureau, where she worked on topics such as net neutrality and location-based services. A diehard Lakers fan, she is still mourning the loss of Kobe Bryant. And speaking of mourning, one of her favorite shows is Game of Thrones. So at least for the next couple of days, since she's still getting over the most recent episode, whatever you do not ask her to hold the door. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Riley?
Yes, I'll just be brief and say I hope everyone has an opportunity to celebrate Memorial Day for the men and women who died serving in the U.S. military, protecting our freedom. It's my understanding in doing a little research that it's the 150th anniversary of the first Memorial Day, or at least the unofficial service that occurred in Waterloo, New York. So I hope everyone has an opportunity in their own special way to honor those that have died for our behalf. Thank you very much.
Thank you for reminding us, Commissioner O'Reilly. I'd like to introduce our first summer law clerk. Ashley, stand up. Ashley Lucci. Amber, Jesus, I'll get this right in a second. Close personal friend, my friend. Here's what you need to know about Amber. She's from The Ohio State University School of Law, College of Law. She is a member of the Federalist Society, the Moritz Mentorship Program, the Law and Leadership Program, and she's also a candidate for a master's degree in public policy. She received an international business degree from Mount Vernon Nazarene University, where she was the senior class president. So we have a born leader with us. She loves photography and rock climbing, an interesting juxtaposition of activities. Says one of her goals is to be in all 59 national parks and presumably climb something in them, not just look at them. So Amber, welcome. We're glad you're here, and go Bucks. You got to meet Marlene, another Ohio State alum. There being no further, we'll turn it over to that special lady, our secretary, to tell us what happens next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The next agenda meeting of the Federal Communications Commission is Thursday, June 23rd, 2016.
Thank you. Meeting adjourned. Well, Lynn, this is going to be real quick, just you and me.
Come on down, folks.
Oh, golly.
Todd, you're not joining us?
Did you say shy? That's right. Okay. Mm-hmm.
All right, I'll turn it over to the chairman for a few words, and then we'll get to
Thank you, Kim. We started the meeting today with a historical reference, and I'm prone to take this opportunity to lecture you guys about little history vignettes. So let's have another anniversary. Yesterday was the 164th anniversary of Abraham Lincoln's electronic breakout, the day that he discovered the power of the new electronic communications tool, the telegraph. He was about 16, 18 months into his first term. He sent more telegrams on May 24th, 1862, on that one day than he had his previous time in office. And from that day forward, he and the telegraph were inexorably linked. So this is the world that began what we have inherited. He was trying to deal with how do you relate to a brand new technology. And I think that's the same kind of things that we're dealing with here and we were dealing with today. Now, here's the spooky, cool little factoid. Abraham Lincoln's electronic breakout happened 18 years to the day from Samuel F.B. Morse sending What Hath God Wrought. Kind of eerie. But with that, we'll start on this end.
Nasser, Morning Consult.
Amir.
I wanted to ask if you have any updates on the joint inquiry the FCC and FTC made into mobile carriers and devices. Obviously, you only can talk about your end, but if you'd gotten any responses from any of the carriers.
I think John Wilkins had until the middle of June for responses, like a 45-day period, so I don't know right now.
First of all, thank you for starting at this end of the table today. I am wondering, yesterday there was this letter from some groups asking for a probe into some zero rating practices. Back in December, you sent those letters to a bunch of companies. I assume those conversations happened, and I'm wondering where that inquiry is now. Note that I did you the favor of not calling an investigation, so where is the inquiry now?
And it is an inquiry. I mean, I hope that nobody has any doubt as to where we stand on a fast, fair, and open internet. The inquiry continues. I'm aware of the recent filing. I think we will, continue apace. At the root of it all is the question of the Open Internet Order and the scope of the Open Internet Order. Hopefully we are moments away from the court's decision on that, and let's see how everything develops.
So just to quickly follow up, the court's decision, how heavily do you think it will weigh on how you decide to proceed with this particular question?
Now that's a hypothetical, and you know that's not the place to go.
I've got to try that.
Good. David.
Hello, Chairman. David Hatch, Policy and Regulatory Report. I was wondering if you think that team telecom reviews should be subject to deadlines, and is that something that you want the upcoming rulemaking to seek comment on?
So the complaint about team telecom reviews has been that they take too long. They are something that happen outside of our hands with the national security apparatus of the executive branch. We've recently had a filing from the executive branch in the proceeding, and we will handle what we can handle in terms of can we move things faster here, number one. In getting them to Team Telecom. After Team Telecom, I mean, we normally act, bam, just like that. Right. But we'll try, and what can we do here to give Team Telecom the tools so that they can move faster, but that's something that happens elsewhere.
Could I just ask, is there any clarity, though, as to whether you would support deadlines? There are a lot of parties who have already filed comments in the docket, and they say that deadlines would give this some structure and make it more like CFIUS. Is that something that you would potentially
as a part of our process reform activities, we're the ones that went to Team Telecom and say, hey guys, can we do more about this? Okay. We can't set deadlines for other agencies. Okay.
Mr. Chairman, Alex Byers with
yes,
Politico. The Third Circuit today vacated the JSA order, and no one's asked about that yet, so I'm interested in your general thoughts. But more specifically, the court kind of chastised the agency a little bit for not moving forward with the media ownership review for about a decade now. And you have said that that's something you want to do in June, but you've also said that part of the issue is that it's hard to get 3 votes on something like that. So I'm interested in how you sort of square those two things, given the court's frustration. How do you put nose to the grindstone and actually do something? Because they've suggested maybe it is time to just throw out all the rules if the FCC doesn't do its review.
So thanks. As I think the court pointed out, this has been a dozen years in coming. It's been across both Republican and Democratic administrations. I committed to the Congress, and the FCC told the court that that I would be putting forth a media ownership proposal on June 30 or by June 30. Intend to stick with that. As you know, in everything, it's a full process of the commission. But I intend to meet that goal. Lynn.
Hi, Lynn Stanton, TR Daily. The House has passed legislation that would require you to get rules up within 24 hours of adopting them, which seems like it would take some major changes in the way you do things. How would you go about dealing with that, given how long it takes now for orders to come out?
Well, I mean, I think first of all, and I've had the discussions, and you know this has been a topic of hearings in the House that I've had direct conversations with the committee about. I think we're at 85-90% of our rulings come out within 24 hours. The things that normally delay them are dissents and conforming kinds of activities. I agree with your interpretation, and I have told the Congress that it, in fact, having a hard 24-hour deadline does cause problems for the folks who are, dragging out writing dissents. I thought that there was that it did not move the ball forward, particularly when we're doing 85-90% now. But the Congress, is free to make the rules. Lydia.
Mr. Chairman, Lydia Bayud, Bloomberg BNA. As part of your work on the quadrennial review that you have promised to take up, will that include provisions on JSAs, or might you do those separately in a different?
Well, let's understand that what the court said was that the JSA rule, they didn't say the JSA rule doesn't make sense. They said the JSA rule needs to be based on rules that themselves have been reviewed. So you review those rules, and that should then set up a predicate for any decision on JSA. This dropped this morning. Whether that goes together or separate, I'm not ready to comment on, to decide. Monty.
Monty Taylor, Com Daily. The Third Circuit also said that you needed to gather the data necessary to review ownership rules and do it quickly, as I read their opinion. How can you do that when the incentive auction is going to be going on? I mean, any data you gather, it would seem to me, would be irrelevant because it won't reflect what's going to happen after the auction, I would think. So is there a plan for dealing with that?
Well, I mean, I think that you have to deal with the data that you've got, and you can't have a supposition of what may or may not happen. I think that you do raise a very legitimate point, and we'll see how the auction plays out. But that does not modify the commitment that I made that I'll have a proposal forward by the end of June. David.
Dave Sheridan from Reuters. You've gotten a lot of criticism. You have a very sweeping agenda for this year. Have you given the criticism from some Democrats on set-top boxes and on just sort of the overall industry response to the privacy rule, the special access? Have you given any thought to whether you're moving too fast or whether you are going to reconsider any parts of your agenda before the year is up?
Golly, David, these are not new starters. These are not issues that just suddenly Wheeler decided to dump them all on us. I mean, let's go through, what everybody kind of calls the big three. Privacy. I mean, you couldn't come near the open internet debate and not, this is going to mean the FCC has jurisdiction on privacy, and let's have a discussion then. That was, 2 years ago on what it means. Set-top box. Golly, we put that out in February. It's now almost June. I would say it's fair to say there has been a full discussion and a continuing discussion, one that will continue on set-top boxes. And on business data services, golly, that's been going on for, 10 years. The goal of those who don't want it to happen has always been to delay it. So I don't think these are things that just have popped up on the radar. These are things that have been discussed, debated, and understood for a long time.
There's a lot of also criticism that you tend to favor the Googles and some other companies as opposed to the cable companies or other maybe more established players. Can you respond generally to whether you sought to pick winners and losers in the?
Boy, I hear that allegation, and I scratch my head. I mean, I was before the Senate Judiciary Committee the other day, and Senator Lee, talked to me about how Google wanted special things in the set-top box proceeding insofar as their privacy restrictions. And I said, well, Senator, I'll tell you, here's one commissioner that's not voting for that. I don't get the charge, but that's not the only charge that gets made either.
All right, thanks everyone.
Nothing from the corner, Todd? I mean, come on. This is your left field. We would expect nothing less than a question from left field from Todd Shields, and there you are.
Congressman Shimkus just sent out a release saying this is third review for the FCC JSA ruling today. So you've been reviewed now, by his count, by the court. Congress passed legislation to bridle and limit your JSA rule. Are you doing something wrong there, and what's next in that regard?
No, as I said, I think what we're going to do, based on what the court said, is we're going to deal with the predicate, which is the media ownership rules, which for 12 years this commission has been unable to come to a conclusion on across all kinds of administrations. And that the JSA issue was subsumed by the broader issue of the media ownership rules. And so we'll get to the media ownership rules. Believe me, I've been saying since I got here that we want to get the media ownership rules done. The core of that decision, as a quick read looks at, is about the media ownership rules. And I've said I'm going to put media ownership rules before this commission in June. Great. Thanks, everybody. Hey, it's the last time I go.
Okay, it's time for the Bureau press conference. Is there any for the Media Bureau on the public file inspection? Any questions on that item? Okay, I guess not. Number 2 was the outage reporting. Are there questions on the outage reporting item? Going once, going twice. Okay. Finally, the Connect America Fund auction. Lynn, okay, Wireline, if you could come up. You all know Carol, right? All right, go ahead, Lynn.
Okay. I was wondering if you could flesh out at all in the further notice portion of the item how it approaches this idea of weighting the different tier levels and bids for the different tier levels. Is there any sort of proposal that people are going to comment on, or is it just completely open-ended?
Several parties in the proceeding had already suggested different weighting schemes with suggestions of specific numerical weights that would be applied. Of course, those suggestions were made before the commission had adopted the performance tier. So, one of the questions asked is, how should how should we consider the proposals that are in the record, and how they should take into account the fact that the Commission has made a decision to select bids based on their cost effectiveness, and a variety of other questions.
There was mention of the reserve pricing. Is that a per cap?
A limit on the amount that can be bid for any particular geographic area, which would be no greater than the amount of model calculated support.
All right, I'm being sent this question, so I don't really understand it. But Dave Kaut wants to know, is there any interim voice support for price cap telcos in the order?
No.
Oh, that's what he wanted.
Any others?
With regard to the 10-year pricing, what does this Commission expect after 10 years? That companies will continue to serve without any additional support, or?
This item doesn't address that.
I think that's all I had then.
Okay.
All right, thank you very much. And Commissioners Pai and O'Reilly are here.
I just want to offer a couple brief words before we got started, and that is with respect to the Third Circuit's decision. If you didn't get my statement from this morning, we'd be happy to send it out. But more generally, I think the Third Circuit's decision is the latest evidence that this agency has become completely untethered to either the rule of law or to sound policy. I think the fact that the Third Circuit identified in painstaking detail the fact that the agency could not revise the JSA attribution rules without determining the propriety of the local television rule, the fact that the Third Circuit expressed in very clear terms its displeasure with this agency for being derelict in its duty to abide by Congress's quadrennial review requirements. The fact that the agency rebutted very strongly the FCC's argument that, well, the petitioners have waived any right to challenge this under Section 405. I'm still studying the court's decision, but I think it's quite clear that this agency has not fulfilled its obligations to Congress and to the American people to keep its media ownership regulations current with the times. And more generally, as I said at the outset, it's just the latest evidence. By my count, I think it's the fourth decision this year by a court rejecting the agency's lawless approach to these issues. Add to that the significant congressional opposition to what the agency has done with respect to joint sales agreements in December of 2015, which I would hope would be reiterated this year by Congress. In addition to the groundswell of bipartisan opposition to the agency's discretionary rabbit hole regulatory agenda, such as set-top box reform. And I think you see that the American people and their elected representatives and the courts are joining, I think, to rebut what the agency is proposing to do in a whole variety of areas. But with that, unless Commissioner O'Reilly has any thoughts?
Questions?
Start with McCabe.
It was a slow meeting, so I have a question about something that happened a couple of weeks ago, actually. And this is for Commissioner Pai, but also Commissioner O'Reilly, if you want. Chairman Thune of the Senate Commerce Committee went after Facebook for reportedly, manipulating conservative news. They've now said that didn't happen. There's no evidence. But my question is more as a conservative voice on tech issues. How comfortable were you with someone from the Congress pursuing Facebook about this particular issue? Do you fall on the side of conservatives? Some conservatives have said, no, this is overreach, or on the side of Chairman Thune?
On this issue, I'm going to play within my lane. I'm not going to purport to tell Congress, Chairman Thune, or any elected official what they should or should not be looking into. And it's obviously not a question that has been presented to us, and so I'm hesitant to comment about it any further than that.
I didn't focus on this and haven't focused on it, but I would just say I think that the Chairman Thune was asking questions and they were answered. If I saw his response just a couple of days ago, so I think that any member has an opportunity to ask those questions and should the second part of the question is what do you do with that? Should there be some kind of restrictions? And I probably have concerns about going along that path.
But also dispute your premise that this was a slow meeting. I mean, any meeting where Game of Thrones is referenced is by definition not a slow meeting.
Do we get to see the socks?
Oh, the socks?
Yeah.
The socks I'm wearing?
Wasn't that?
Is that what she was talking about?
Isn't that she was what Commissioner Cleveland was talking about?
Yeah, so, National Association of Farm Broadcasters Socks, which...
Wow.
Yes, taking inspiration from Brendan Carr in our office, who wears very colorful socks. And so, as I understand it, this is the hip new thing, I guess, and
I believe I was with you in that meeting. I didn't get socks.
Okay, David? Commissioners, what are your reactions to the NTIA proposals on overhauling Team Telecom? Could they result in more protracted reviews of mergers? Could the FCC still be left in the dark? Do you have concerns about lack of transparency, structure, and deadlines?
I've spoken at length about this issue, and the opaqueness of the current process, the timeliness of the current process is being problematic from the current administration. I am digesting the administration's letter and what it seeks. I would disagree a little bit with what Chairman Wheeler talked about in your previous question. I had to see, we defer to the administration. We're not obligated by statute to give them such latitude. So we do have the right to impose deadlines as we see fit. So I'm hopeful that we will have some kind of process to address some of those concerns that the people have raised regarding Team Telecom. It's not just the timeliness, but also is the opaqueness. What is actually happening? Multiple people have raised, multiple parties have raised that they have no idea and no ability to figure out who to actually talk to in the administration to figure out where the process, what is happening with their application, what's the story. So I'm hopeful that we will move forward on that issue. I think we can do so with the guidelines of protecting and preserving national security, and I hopefully will do that this year.
Could I just follow up with you? Are you concerned that what the NTIA has put forward does not address one of your core grievances, which is that Team Telecom has basically left you and other commissioners in this agency in the dark on the status of these reviews?
Like I said, we do not have to, I'm still digesting the letter, but in and of itself, we can move forward. We're not obligated to defer completely to the administration on this issue. And so to the extent that we can put timelines on those things so we can resolve some of those timeliness issues.
Do you have an opinion?
I hate to give the boring answer, but like Commissioner O'Reilly, I'm studying the order, and so I haven't reached any determination about whether it's the right direction or not.
Lynn Stanton, TR Daily. There's whether or not it was exciting or not because of Game of Thrones, it was a little calmer, less edgy meeting. We'll put it that way. Do you think? Okay, so that's where I was going. This isn't a signal of a turning of a corner of better working relationships and ability to negotiate over orders, you think?
Look, I obviously welcome any opportunity to engage in a bipartisan way when it's presented to me, but I think the overall direction that the agency has gone signals, I think, the way things are going to be, at least for the remainder of the year. This was a very welcome respite, but I think if you look at some of the aggressive and, in my view, arbitrary issues on the Commission's agenda, privacy, set-top box, special access, you name it, it's pretty clear that the Chairman's office wants to force through a very regulatory, highly partisan agenda without any interest in compromising or even listening to people on different sides of the issue, including members of his own party. So that's unfortunately I think, the mode of operation around here at the moment.
I would say it like this, that I try to show a path on where I can be supportive and where I can get to a common place with my colleagues on all the issues and many issues. Many times that's not reciprocated. Here we found some instances where we were able to work together, and that's great. We disagreed. I obviously had disagreed on parts. The further notice in the Part 4 item is just, I hope you all have a chance to read it. It's just out there. I think that the further notice in the CAF item raises a host of issues that would be problematic for the future of universal service and our auction policy. I understand how they got there, but I don't agree with them. So there were parts that I had a problem with. But I try to show a path on many issues that hasn't materialized always. I do agree with my colleague that there are a number of things that are coming forward. This is a little bit of an abnormality a month, maybe. I think there's a problem. I think most people anticipate there's about a dozen issues I'm anticipating. I've got them mapped out of my head in what we're going to digest between now and the end of the year, probably between now and October. I think a lot of those are going to be a little bit more exciting than Commissioner Pai's socks.
And if I could add just a quick additional comment. So I agree with everything Commissioner O'Reilly said. I think it's also significant, not just what the agency is going to do, but what it hasn't done yet. And so the fact that we have not devoted enough bandwidth to, for example, the contraband cell phone docket, an NPRM that was teed up unanimously in 2013, reforms that are widely supported, including most recently by 10 governors from Maine to South Carolina, who said, look, we can resolve this issue, but we need the FCC to act. If you look at the AM radio proceeding, what should have been a very easy bipartisan solution that ended up being a long, drawn-out battle, I think it's pretty clear that what the agency doesn't do or does very, very belatedly is almost as significant as some of the things that it is doing proactively.
Lydia Bayud, Bloomberg BNA. Commissioners, the chairman highlighted some of the hurdles his and previous administrations have faced in completing this quadrennial review. What would you like to see in it? What would you expect to see in it? And what would it take for you to be part of the majority or part of the groups voting for such an item?
Look, I actually don't think it's that difficult. When I was a staffer, I worked here during the 2007, or I guess technically 2006, quadrennial review. And there, the agency, even though it ultimately wasn't upheld in court, the agency did its work. It reviewed certain rules, urged the relaxation of the newspaper broadcast cross-ownership rule slightly. So it's not as if previous administrations have failed in their willingness to tackle this issue. What the agency did in 2013, by comparison, 2013, I believe it was, if I referred you to my dissent, it simply kicked the can down the road. It refused to take any action whatsoever on everything except for JSAs, in which case they said, okay, we're going to very strictly prohibit or restrict the ability to broadcast stations to engage in those. What would it take for me to be part of the bipartisan majority? Look, hope springs eternal here. When you have, it's pretty rare that I would agree with Reed Hundt on much, but when he said, for example, that if you look at some of these media ownership regulations, such as the newspaper broadcast cross ownership, it's insane to think that we are still retaining these outdated regulations in the 21st century. It's going to take an agency that's committed to viewing the marketplace the way it is, as opposed to the way it was in 1975 when some of these regulations were adopted. I mean, just look at some of the debates now that are in the news. Somebody earlier asked about the Facebook controversy. Think about what that controversy is about. It's about social media and the way that news is being distributed. I mean, that's an entire concept that has no reflection in our media ownership regulations. And so a lot of these restrictions, and that's just the most obvious ones. If you're talking about, say, newspaper and radio cross-ownership, there's literally no evidence in the record, has not been for years, any evidence to suggest that those requirements remain necessary. And so if the agency is going to be forward-thinking and objective about the marketplace, then I will be more than happy to sign up. If it's dilatory and if it objectively refuses to see this issue as anything other than another political football, then I'm going to dissent, and it's that simple.
I would say it this way. Many of you know my history. The media ownership rules were pretty much the last piece of the Telecom Act to be decided. The staff had worked on a lot of pieces. Members finally resolved the 202H. That was one of the last pieces. So it was obviously very contentious at the time to figure out a path. But it was a path that the Commission was supposed to address on behalf of the Congress, and it was directed to go a certain way. I have problems with how the Third Circuit has interpreted the statute and allowing it to go both ways, both regulatory and deregulatory. I disagree with that. But to your question, what would I like to see or what is it going to take? To me, it is living up to the statutory provision. It is to update our rules to reflect the current marketplace and the realities of what companies are facing. And so things like, if it just means we're going to turn around and impose the JSA in this other item, the JSA restrictions in this other item. If it means we're not going to address the newspaper cross-ownership issues, then I've got problems. I don't know what it's going to do. I mean, the chairman said it's a priority of mine, but as you remember, he said that early in his tenure and said, I'm going to do it then, 2 years from now. Well, we finally got to that point, right? We're almost there. We're all going to wait to see what this thing is. And I'm expected to be underwhelmed in terms of its content. I'm not sufficiently convinced that it will meet the court. Like I said, I'm still digesting the decision, but I'm not of a mindset that it is probably going to meet that, and we'll just be in this perpetual place for a long while, and we'll have to, there was an opportunity to resolve this in some regards, in that the case was petitioned to go to the D.C. Circuit and might have had a different path, but now we're on this path, and it's, we're stuck on this never-ending cycle.
Monty Taylor, Com Daily. I got the same question for you guys I had for the chairman, which is how can, you guys are saying that the FCC should look at the current marketplace before it messes with the ownership rules, but how can it do that when everything about broadcasting is in flux right now? I mean, can studying the current broadcast market form a basis for rules when everything is going to change?
Let me put it this way. So Congress passed the Spectrum Act in February of 2012. The agency has known for over 4 years there was going to be an incentive auction. And knowing that, if it had completed its quadrennial review obligations on time, then it wouldn't have had to cross this bridge, right? I mean, by definition, we would have acted years before the incentive auction ever started. And so I think it's partly a function of the fact that the crossroads we are at is partly a function of the fact that the agency has been derelict in its duty to meet the quadrennial reporting obligation that Commissioner O'Reilly talked about. And at this point, we are where we are, and I think that we should do our best under the situation, under the circumstances, to update those rules to reflect the marketplace the way it is.
I do agree with the point that the incentive auction is going to change some, because depending on a successful auction, which I root for, but assuming a successful auction, it will have an impact on ownership and who decides to exit the marketplace. But in the meantime, we have statutory obligations to comply with the law, and so I think that we move forward as best we can in that circumstance. And that means, we all know you don't need the incentive auction to be completed to know what's happening in the newspaper ownership, in the newspaper industry. You can see that every day in what's happening with newspapers. Your party. You're party to that industry closer than I am, and you know what's happening. It's becoming more digital because they're not subject to the rules, and we're phasing out the printed word, and the current newspaper industry is collapsing, in my opinion. You see the investment structure where newspapers are being put in IPOs and different mechanisms to basically not affect the current market price of a company that may hold them. So I think that's problematic. I think we can address those issues separate from the incentive auction. I don't think the incentive auction is going to cloud some of those things.
I got one follow-up. Do you have the time to complete all the stuff that the court wants the FCC to do in this administration? I mean, it seems like you guys are running out of time if you have to study all this stuff and come up with ownership rules and examine them and then maybe put out new JSA rules or something. Does the FCC have the time to get that done under
Well, they don't have to do the JSA piece. Well, yeah, so there's things that you don't have to do. It doesn't take a lot of time or effort to repeal pieces that no longer make any sense. It may take some time to gather, but I'm assuming that the Commission has been doing all of that work for the last couple of years. I've been party to that. I don't know what's happening. I've been promised that I'll see the recommendations, soon. So I hope that they have been working on those issues and will affect what the numbers that I have seen over the days in terms of newspapers or other radio. We've talked about AM radio at length and the problems the Commission has done. The resolution we tried to done, and my good colleagues work on AM revitalization. If you talk to the industry and what's happening in AM radio, you talk about what's happening in FM radio. There's financial difficulty happening right now, and so we're trying to, we should that should already be known, and it should not require extensive work. Meeting like I said, I have to go back and read the court case even finer, but there are some things that they asked for, and I just don't know what the Commission's been doing on its the definition piece, which is the front end of the structure.
More generally, I just say, look, these are not tough issues, right? I mean, we were told 2 years ago the agency had been studying them. Reason to kick the can down the road was to give the agency plenty of time to come up with all these facts. And moreover, as Commissioner O'Reilly pointed out, there are a great number of rules. I mentioned the newspaper radio rule, for which there's literally no evidence in the record. And so it's no certain that in 2016 the FCC is going to spend a ton of time deciding whether or not the Topeka Capital Journal and WIBW can collaborate is just so obsolete a conversation that I can't really believe we're going to expend a tremendous amount of effort figuring out whether to retain those kinds of requirements. It's just a complete waste of time.
Can I follow up on the newspaper rules? The trend recently has been for newspaper companies to split into two, to segregate those newspaper assets in one company. So practically speaking, how do you think ending the cross-ownership rules would impact the newspaper business?
Yeah, we may have missed the window, right? There were a bunch of broadcast grandfathered situations that did test out the structure and actually was working for a while. Now you're seeing different things happen. It may be that if we were to eliminate this rule, it'd have no practical impact because no one wants to buy newspapers. That may be the case, and you see the purchase price of some of the bigger, Hallmark station, newspapers. They're relatively low, last 5 years, and what the Boston Globe went for, or even the premium price for the Washington Post. So I don't know that the changing the rule will have an impact, but I do know it does provide a potential bidder for a newspaper, and so it is not you have an option for if you're in a newspaper trying to figure out what are my partnerships, what are my options to survive in the future, rather than being in a death spiral in a separate company and just waiting for the revenues to be extracted out. That you do have a potential other bidder in the marketplace, and that may help provide increased bids against whomever else, whichever billionaire that people seem to be favoring at the moment to come in and buy the newspaper. So there may be a competitive option, and that may have a mechanism to preserve some of the financials of the newspaper, like pensions and other things that go with them. So.
The chairman's main point when we asked him about this was that this is just a procedural thing, and we just need to do the media ownership rules, and then the JSA rules themselves. I know this just came out, so probably a lot of people haven't been able to look at the decision, but sort of scanning it, the court doesn't get too much into the merits of the rules themselves. You guys obviously have criticized those merits, that they're actually a bad thing, or the rules would be a bad thing. What's your thought there? That on the chairman's suggestion that we'll just fix this with procedure, but the court didn't say anything bad about the policy.
Well, I mean, I think the reason the court didn't get into the merits of the rules is because the agency abdicated its duty to say whether the rules continue to be necessary in light of the current marketplace realities. And I think the language the court did use with respect to the agency's abdication of its duty was pretty striking. I mean, it's quite unusual to see a court of appeals say that an agency has completely failed to meet its congressionally imposed obligation to review regulations. And I think what you saw was tremendous frustration from the court. In some of the passages I saw, at least, in which it said, look, the agency had better provide a cogent explanation for why these rules remain necessary, and if it doesn't do that, it proceeds at its own risk. I mean, that's language that federal judges are quite loath to use unless an agency really has neglected its statutory duties.
I would say it this way, and I just had a chance to read it once, but I want to go back and do it with a finer comb. But to your point, this court has talked about media ownership in its past decisions, and it's particularly the newspaper cross ownership, where it wanted to, but decided to remand for procedural reasons, the outright elimination of it. So it has talked about some of these rules in the past. It didn't as much in this item, but it is expecting the commission to meet the statutory obligations as we are.
Gentlemen, Todd Shields, Bloomberg News. Are there any restrictions on television station ownership that you would support?
Please.
I mean, I'm not going to prejudge the issue, but I certainly think that the ownership restrictions that we have are outmoded. So whether or not any of them continue to be viable in some form is something we'd have to think about. Off the top of my head, nothing. I can't say definitively what I wouldn't or wouldn't support, but certainly they're far too restrictive now.
Yeah.
I think there are some that I would continue. You know, I don't want to see one party own all of the television stations in a big market, for instance. You know, I think that's potentially problematic. But I want to see what that in practice. I want to see some information and have an opportunity for someone to put, you know, an application before us. So I don't want to prejudge, but I would see that there are potential limits to some ownership situations. But that's far from what we have today. We're fighting over JSAs and duopolies and cross ownership bans that make no sense in the current marketplace. We're far from getting anywhere close to where my limits are and what I think could be permitted, while still recognizing the need of localism and the public interest and necessity and things that we are obligated to enforce. So I think we're far from that point. I haven't spent a ton of time thinking about what are my ultimate limits, because we're not. I'm expecting to be underwhelmed on this item. I'm expecting it to say, oh gee, the court said you need to do JSAs as part of media ownership, and they'll check that box and jam it into something that doesn't provide much relief and then move on. So I don't have to think about, you know, what are my ultimate barriers. We're not even anywhere close to that.
Just make sure that I understand like what the next step would be on JSAs. So do you anticipate that the chairman would simply include that in the quadrennial review of media ownership? And so,
I mean, that's what I thought I heard him say. I mean, you may have heard differently. That's what I thought I heard him say as part of his press conference. I might have. That's based on his comments. That's what I was interpreting him to say.
So what would be needed for the FCC to uphold the JSA requirements?
Well, you're asking the wrong person, because I would just not do that. I don't agree with the decision on JSAs. I would just eliminate it. I think it's unnecessary and problematic and harmful, especially if you believe in diversity of ownership, some of the things that they've been able to do with JSAs. So I don't agree with the decision. I would want to give them any help in trying to preserve them.
Understood.
Anyone else? Thank you very much.
All righty.